So the question is, if a big solar flare or EMP was to hit, what would it do to the hundreds and hundreds of nuclear reactors? And you want to talk about a detailed report. I mean, it's long, but it's a quick read with maps, documents, cases where reactors have already had trouble that I didn't even know about, but went and looked up. It's true. It's 400 Chernobyl, solar flares, EMPs, and nuclear Armageddon by Matthew Stein. And going over his bio here, Matthew Stein is a design engineer, green builder. Again, I'm all for green building. I'm just against paying carbon taxes to foreign banks. And author of 2 best-selling books, When Disaster Strikes, A Comprehensive Guide to Emergency Planning and Crisis. Excellent book. I've read it. Put out in 2011. And When Technology Fails, A Manual for Self-Reliance. I haven't read that yet, but I ordered it. Sustainability and Surviving the Long Emergency. And again, I'm for real sustainability, not the counterfeit that means build 3 coal plants in China a week and we don't get to have any. We're just, or shut off our oil and ship it all to China and block new alternative energies from being developed. See, it's about a monopoly, but I'm digressing. Stein is a graduate of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he majored in mechanical engineering. Stein has appeared on every show you can imagine, and he's also a guest columnist for the Huffington Post. And he joins us to go over what real threats are, because they've got these hot dog people. Fox News took our headline and said, Homeland Security hires wiener watchers, the hot dog vendors, acting like everybody's a terrorist. You got a better chance being killed by champagne corks, honeybees, or deer jumping out in front of you. Look up the statistics. We've gone over them here. So what are the real threats? What are the real threats? And this is a real one. We've only had, you know, nuclear power engineering on a mass scale the last 30, 40 years. And we've had it for 60, 70 in submarines, but I guess the first one was the Nautilus or whatever. But now it's proliferating, and now they've got the greenies pushing neighborhood reactors. Oh, that's another wonderful idea. So we've got him with us for the rest of the hour. And then we have another guest joining us, Lawrence Lessig, and he's an expert on the attack on free speech and the internet and how Congress has been corrupted. But good to have you with us, Mr. Stein. We appreciate you coming on, and we appreciate your article. But please break down as best you can what you put in this big paper. Okay. Well, here it is. You're genuine. This is a real threat. This is like a guaranteed Armageddon. This is an event that we haven't seen on this planet since 65 million years ago, when an asteroid hit, or who knows what exactly happened, but something wiped out all the dinosaurs in a short period of time. And this is a totally avoidable event. So here's the situation. Solar storms hit our planet fairly often. We had, in the last 150 years, we've had about 100 significant storms. We had one a week ago where they had to reroute some Delta flights over the North Pole because of the ionizing radiation. This is basically when the sun burps, it gives like a huge mass called a coronal mass ejection. When stuff from the sun gets launched out into space. Now, this happens all the time, solar minimums, solar maximums, but most of the time it's not aimed towards our planet. So it just goes off into space, no big deal. Now and then it hits our planet. Well, now and then it hits our planet really, really big. So back in 1921, there was a solar storm where it lit up the sky, blood, orange, green, yellow streaks, all kinds of things, all the way from the North Pole down to Puerto Rico and Haiti, and all the way from the South Pole to Samoa. So every place on the planet got this incredible light show, except for a narrow band around the equator. Now, back then when it happened, it was like no big deal. Nobody, very few, maybe a few people died. Some telegraph stations burned down. Penn Central Station burned down from induced currents that started fires. But there were no nuclear power plants. There was no microelectronics. There was no giant power grid. Well, fast forward to today. If we had a storm like the 1921 one, that was 90 years ago, and before that, the next extreme one before that was in 1859 called the Carrington event. Similar light show, only it went on for an entire week. There was 2 giant CMEs spaced 5 days apart. One blasted, and then a few days later, another one blasted out of the sun. It hit the planet Earth, and so the first one kind of got the magnetosphere spinning and all the electronic interactions going on the planet kind of revved up, like revving up an engine. And then the second one hit a few days later and revved it up to high gear.
So if either of those happen today, we've got over 100,000 miles of high voltage, extra high voltage power lines uniting the grid in the United States alone, over 100,000 miles. So these power lines are going to act like a giant antenna, and they're going to take this energy from space that's been induced from these charged particles hitting our upper atmosphere, and they're going to suck it up. And when they do, they're going to send thousands of volts and amps down these lines, and there's transformers called extra high voltage transformers that they started putting into our grid in the late 60s, mostly in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They upgraded the grid in North America. And what happens is when this grid gets zapped by all of this energy from outer space, then it's like the grid is operating on synchronized, it's 60 volts, 60 cycles, like all of our lights, everything's going at 60 cycles.
It's going to totally fry everything and blow them out. As you said, you've got photos and news reports. When the power lines, last time this happened, lit up red and melted. Or I guess those were just telegraph lines. What is this going to do? Yeah, this is going to be wild.
This is going to blow the transformers. And when it does, now people say, well, can't you just go down, to the hardware store and buy a new transformer? Well, these transformers are like 300 tons each, and they're multi-million dollars, and they're all custom designed and custom built. So it takes 3 years now to buy a single transformer. Now, in 1989, we had a big geomagnetic storm, 1/10 the size of the 1921 storm, which was supposedly 50% less than the 1859. So 1989, we have a big storm, way bigger than the one we had a week ago, way bigger. And that fried a transformer in Quebec, knocked out power to 9 million people for something like 6 hours. It also fried a transformer in the East Coast, and it fried a transformer in the UK. But this was only 2 in North America, and it almost caused a cascading failure. Well, the 1921 one, the science modeling says it's going to fry and cook 350 or more of these transformers in the United States, 2,000 worldwide. Well, in the whole world, we make about 100 of these a year. So if we get 2,000 worldwide, that's like 20 years of production. Now, all of a sudden, grid down, grid collapse.
It's taken 100 years to build this grid up to where it is, and if it's anywhere near, like you're saying, the one that hit over 100 years ago, this would be devastating. Do we have any actuaries or ideas on how much would get knocked out?
Yeah, we're talking 350 in North America, 2,000 in the world for the 1921 storm. That's what the Meditech study, it was Sandia National Labs, Oak Ridge National Labs. Wow. They all checked it. So this is a big study. And this has been checked and verified.
So they know this, and they're just sitting there waiting for it to happen.
Well, here's the thing. They've put bills since 2008. They've had 2 different bills in Congress, and they've narrowly avoided passing it. The latest one's called the SHIELD Act. But the SHIELD Act is still kind of silly. It's like the SHIELD Act says, well, we're not going to do anything. We're the government, but we're going to make the utilities do something, spend a couple $2 billion to fix this problem. And then if they don't like it, then they can appeal to us and get some financial help. But the problem is the utilities are saying, we don't want to spend it, so they're fighting it.
Stay there. Amazing. Amazing, sir. This is so important. We'll be right back after this quick break. This couldn't be more important.
Everything we said came true. Everything we've done has been right.
We'll take a few calls if you have specific questions for our guest, Matthew Stein, author of When Disaster Strikes and When Technology Fails, best-selling author, MIT design engineer and builder, obviously, as well as a writer. And whentechnologyfails.com is one of the websites you can visit. It's excellent. He put out this big report, 400 Chernobyls, solar flare, EMP, and nuclear Armageddon, because it's bad enough to have years of power outages and problems and infrastructure damage, but getting into the reactors, this is a short segment, long segment coming up, Mr. Stein, but obviously it's the reactors are one of the biggest threats, correct?
Yeah, the reactors are the end of the world as we know it problem, and this is the one where it's a no-brainer we could solve this problem. I mean, there's no way to protect against all the bad effects of an EMP or a solar storm, but we can protect against nuclear Armageddon. Now, here's the ticket with nuclear power plants. When Fukushima blew up and melted down, It wasn't, at least according to Japanese authorities, it wasn't the direct effects of the the large 9.0 earthquake. It was the after effect of the tsunami. And I'll explain. When every nuclear power plant has to keep its core cooled or it's going to melt down. You're generating like millions and millions of BTUs instantly in the power core, and that heat is used to generate all the power and the electricity out of steam generators. Well, if you stop running the fluid through that core, all that extra heat's going to go somewhere. It's going to melt the core down and blow the reactor. So when Fukushima blew, after the tsunamis came in and wiped out the backup generators. See, whenever the grid goes down, every nuclear reactor goes into automatic shutdown mode, where the reactor fuel rods and the control rods mesh together and start cooling it down. But there's so much heat in there, and the reactor doesn't stop like flipping a switch, so you got to keep that cooled for the next 3 to 5 years. You got to cool reactor rods after you start shutting them down. So what happened then is earthquake hit, reactor cut off from the grid went down, grid failed, reactor goes into shutdown mode, the backup generators kick on, the backup batteries kick in, and they keep the cooling pumps going. Well, 20 minutes later, the tsunami comes along, wipes out the cooling pumps. A couple hours later, you're going snap, crackle, pop. You're melting down the cores, and you're dissociating water into hydrogen and oxygen, making explosive gases, blowing the containment vessel, and we all saw what happened. Now, fast forward, we get a big, giant solar storm, and not like the little one, not like the big one. We get an extreme one. Big one, 1989, caused problems. Big one, 2003. Fried 14 transformers in South Africa, screwed up the grid for an entire year, rolling blackouts to the whole country for a year, for only 14 transformers gone. Fast forward, we get one like 1921. We got a solar maximum coming up, end of 2012, beginning of 2013. We get one like 1921. They're really worried. Signs are looking like we might have a big one like that. All of a sudden, grids totally collapsed, down for years in places, some places back short term. But where the dense population is, that's where the nuclear reactors are. That's where the grid collapses, where it's dense. That's where it collapses. Now, all of a sudden, you got chaos. Nobody's getting food. Nobody's getting gas. No pumps to pump. No fuel refined in the refineries. Everything down over most of the industrialized parts of the planet, except for the deep tropical zones that disconnected from other parts of the grid. Suddenly, the government promises that they're going to show up at these reactors with diesel fuel like clockwork to make sure they're all working. All 104 reactors in America. We got 1/3, more than 1/3, 37% of all Americans live within 50 miles of a nuclear reactor.
Whoa, let me stop you. I see where you're going. They're built on our coastlines. 70+% of our population's on the coast. The feds can't show up to bring water a week and a half in at Katrina. They can never help. They can't put out fires in Texas. All the feds do is show up and tell the locals to go under their command and then screw it up. There's no way the feds a couple weeks into this, they're going to be gone, and those things are going to start blowing.
They're going to start blowing. Now, chances are that the solar storm will not screw up electronics on a small scale. It'll just fry the grid. So chances are that most of those backup power systems will work. But they're only mandated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to store 1 week's worth of fuel on hand. So when you go out and see this most incredible light show of your life at night, and you say, man, I can't believe this, you got to see this, this is incredible, it goes on for a night, maybe 2, maybe a week, start the clock running. You got about a week before nuclear Armageddon, unless we fix the problem, and we can fix it.
By the way, you're a serious guy, but I've done my own research. What you're saying is accurate. And this is not hype, and I can tell you're concerned. I'm concerned too, and I make it my job to research this stuff. I've read it over the years, but never really consciously thought about this problem. Let's talk about it more when we get back. This is unbelievable.